There's a feeling that doesn't have a clean name. It's not quite sadness. It's not despair exactly. It's quieter than that. It's the feeling of wanting to stop. Not to die necessarily, just to stop existing for a while. To be nowhere. To feel nothing. To be released from the weight of being a person. If you've ever felt that, if you've ever stared at the ceiling at 2 a.m. and just thought, I want everything to go quiet, you're not broken. You're experiencing something that philosophers, psychologists, poets, and even saints have been trying to understand for thousands of years. And today we're going to talk about it. Let's start with what this actually is, because it's easy to misunderstand. The desire for nothingness is not the same as suicidal ideation, though they can sometimes overlap. Researchers make an important distinction here. Psychologists call one version of this passive suicidal ideation, the wish to not exist without a plan or an intent to act. Studies suggest that roughly 1 in 5 adults will experience this at some point in their life. That's how common it is, and yet sometimes we completely ignore this. But there's an even broader experience, one that's not about death at all. It's about an escape. The mind under enormous pressure can be grief, burnout, overstimulation, pain. Sometimes reaches for the simplest possible solution. Absence. Just not being here for a moment. Dr. Matthew Knock, a clinical psychologist at Harvard, describes this as the mind searching for relief from unbearable psychological pain. It desires not death. It's for an end of suffering, nothingness. Nothingness just feels like the only way out. Interestingly, long before psychology gave this clinical language, the Christian tradition was already sitting with this exact feeling, but just labeled as something different. Open the book of Job. Here is a man who lost everything: children, his health, livelihood. And in his agony, he doesn't offer a prayer of quiet acceptance. He cries out. He says, "Why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb?" Job isn't asking to be killed. He's asking with raw, shaking honesty why existence was given to him at all, if this is what existence felt like. That is the desire for nothingness, written 3,000 years ago, placed right there in the heart of Scripture, not condemned, not corrected, recorded. And he's not alone. The prophet Elijah, after one of his great victories, collapsed under a tree in the desert and said, "I've had enough, Lord. Take my life." Elijah was not weak. He was exhausted, depleted. And the response from God was not a lecture, but an angel, bringing bread and water and the words, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." Even David, the man after God's own heart, wrote in the Psalms, "Oh, that I had the wings of a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. I would flee far away and stay in the desert. How quickly I would escape, far from this wild storm of hatred." The desire to disappear, to escape, to find silence, the world cannot break. This is not a modern crisis. This is an ancient cry of the human soul. Now, looking beyond the Bible, the longing for nothingness has echoed in philosophy. The ancient Greeks had a word, aponia, the absence of pain, and ataraxia, the absence of anxiety. I hope I said those words right. A state of tranquil calm. They believed the ideal human life was not one of pleasure, but of the removal of suffering. In Buddhist philosophy, there's nirvana, often mistranslated as nothingness, but better understood as the extinguishing of craving and suffering. The flame's not destroyed, it simply goes out. And in that going out, there is peace. In some German philosophy as well, some philosophers have believed that existence itself was suffering, that life was driven by a blind, insatiable will that could never be satisfied. And the prescription was to withdraw from desire, a quieting of this self. Peace can be found when the self turns away from life. That's a dark thought, but it resonated with millions because sometimes life genuinely feels like a machine that never stops demanding things off of you. Now, where the Christian thought differs is important because Christianity does not say escape is the answer, but it does say that the suffering is real. And it does say that the longing for rest is real. And it points to somewhere different for the solution. In the 16th century, a Spanish mystic poet named John of the Cross wrote one of the most quietly devastating spiritual texts ever composed. He called it The Dark Night of the Soul. John described a spiritual experience where God seems to go completely silent, where prayer feels hollow, faith, once warm and alive, became cold and distant, where the soul is left in what he called a thick darkness. No consolation, no feeling, stripped of the divine presence. This isn't doubt, it's not sin, it's, well, according to John of the Cross, a purification, a stripping away of the self's attachment to comforts, to the world, to feeling, to spiritual experience itself, so that what remains is something actually more pure, deeper, more real. The desire for nothingness in this framework might be understood as the soul reaching the end of itself. The moment where all things you leaned on, your certainty, your energy, yourself, your sense of meaning have run out, and what's left is emptiness, silence. Don't run from it, he says. Don't perform, don't pretend. Because God, he believed, is present even in that darkness, and especially in that darkness. Working quietly away in the soul, in a way which we may not yet feel or understand. The 20th century theologian Henry Nouwen put it this way: the place of emptiness is not a place to escape from, it's a place to enter more deeply. Now, we live in an age of relentless stimulation. notification, news cycles, social media, social comparison, the expectation to be productive all the time, visible, optimized, reachable. Neuroscientists have found that the modern brain it's like in a near constant state of low-grade stress. Our nervous system were designed for a quieter world. We're not built for this constant cycle. There's a concept in psychology called sensory deprivation relief, the measurable calm that comes when external input is removed. You may have seen flotation tanks, silent retreats, nature walks. Studies on these things have shown that the brain, given true quietness, begins to repair itself. It's healing. The cortisol drops, the stress quietens. The Christian tradition has always known this in its own way. Monks have practiced silence for centuries, not as deprivation, but as discipline, as a way of stripping away the noise so that something underneath could be heard. The Desert Fathers, early Christians who fled to the Egyptian desert in the 3rd and the 4th centuries, went looking for exactly what the overloaded modern mind now crave: stillness. One of them, Father Moses, gave this instruction to a younger monk. He said, "Go, sit in your cell, and your cell will teach you everything. Stop. Be still. Stop performing. Stop filling the silence. Let the quietness do its work. Be honest with yourself." The psalmist echoes this: "Be still and know that I am God." Not be productive, not be useful, not be okay, but be still. The desire for nothingness at its root may be the soul's desperate search for exactly that kind of stillness. A stillness the world has never offered. A silence we've forgotten how to find. Let's be honest. For some people, this desire for nothingness is not just exhaustion or spiritual dryness. It can be something much heavier. When the wish to disappear is persistent, when it comes every day, when it's wrapped in hopelessness, when it's starting to feel like rest and more like an escape from life that feels unlivable, that's a sign for something that needs more attention. Research by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention shows that the passive death wishes, that "I wish I could just sleep and not wake up" feeling, over time it can escalate if not addressed. The Christian tradition does not romanticize this darkness. It does take it seriously. C.S. Lewis, after the death of his own wife, he wrote A Grief Observed. Not that he doubted God's existence, but that grief had made God feel like a door slammed shut, silent, absent. But he kept writing, he kept showing up. He kept speaking to the silence, even if the silence didn't answer back. That's faith in its most strict-back form. Not certainty, not joy, just continuation. One foot in front of another, one step at a time, one prayer into the dark. If you're in that place right now, I want to say something directly. You're not dramatic. You're not weak. You're not faithless. You're a person who's in pain. And this pain was never meant to be carried alone. Not by you, not by Elijah under the tree, not by Job in his farm. Please talk to someone, a friend, a pastor, a therapist, family, a crisis line. You're allowed to need help. You're allowed to say, I can't do this alone. And that's in scripture as well. Here's something we don't often say aloud. There's something almost beautiful about the human desire for nothingness. Not in a dangerous way, but in a deeply human and perhaps even spiritual way. The poet John Keats wrote something about being half in love with the easeful death. Not as a death wish, but as a longing for stillness in a world that felt far too loud, too brief as well, too painful. Virginia Woolf described moments of wanting to dissolve into water, or to light, or into silence. And the mystics of the Christian tradition described something similar, where they called kenosis, a Greek word meaning emptying, the voluntary letting go of the self, the willingness to be poured out. Paul writes in Philippians that Christ emptied himself, he made himself nothing, out of love. There's theology here that is stunning in its gentleness. That's the moment toward nothingness, toward emptiness, toward the end of striving. It's not always a fall. Sometimes it's a descent. And descents in the Christian imagination are often the beginning of resurrection. The seed, after all, it must be planted, it must go into the ground before it grows into something new. The desire for nothingness, it's not something to be ashamed of. It's a signal, a symptom, a philosophical longing, a spiritual season, sometimes a cry for rest, sometimes something that needs real human help. But it's never meaningless. The Bible gave it space. The mystics walked through it. The saints wept inside of it. Philosophers thought about it. And somehow, on the other side, there was a new day. A new morning. Not always the morning you expected, but morning nonetheless. If this video found you while you're in a tough time, I hope you feel a little less alone. The world, it's so loud. Life is heavy. And wanting silence is not weakness. It means you're paying attention. Take care of yourself. Peace be with you. And God bless.